Hey y'all, welcome back to our channel.
I'm Matt Digman.
And I'm Roddy.
We're the authors of The Dark That Dwells, our debut space opera novel that was published on July 10th, 2020. We're also the creators of the Doctoring the Book series, where we use our experience as pediatric emergency medicine physicians to help authors craft realistic injuries and illnesses in their fiction.
We're here to discuss our 10 essential world-building tips.
After writing our own novel, which as the first installment in a sci-fi fantasy space opera series relied heavily on world building, we compiled this list as a set of fundamentals to keep in mind while creating a world.
In today's video, we'd like to share them with you in the hopes that they might help you in your process as well.
Along the way, we'll give you some definitions, theoretical concepts and explanations, and some specific examples from The Dark That Dwells.
That way, you can see exactly how the information we present was useful to us and potentially can be for you too.
As always, we don't claim to be experts or to have created these concepts, but we hope to provide you a new perspective.
Kind of like an experienced mechanic changing a tire. He can't take credit for inventing the wheel or the lug wrench, but he probably has a lot to teach you.
First, what is world building? Well, to us, it's the art of creating an entirely new existence from nothing but our imaginations, inhabited by characters who are both changed by it and affect change upon it.
Now, you probably already had an idea of what world building was. It's kind of in the name itself. But did you catch that last part? Characters aren't usually included in the standard definition of world building.
But we have them there because we think they're essential, which is a great segue into the first item on our list.
Did you already have a main character in mind when you sat down to imagine the world they would live in? Or did you start with the world and then imagine a character to fit inside it?
You know how it is. You're daydreaming up a cool scenario or scene, and you think, hey, that would make a great story. But what came first? Did you imagine Cornithar, Dragon Slayer and heir to the fallen empire of Goringo Moss? Or did you imagine a desperate land without a ruler, plagued by dragons on the verge of chaos? It could have gone either way. But why?
Because neither one can exist without the other. No matter which one you begin with, you'll find as soon as you start to picture Cornithar, a world starts to take shape around him, even if it's just a few feet. And if you picture the desolate landscape of Goringo Moss, the hero-shaped hole in the world starts to look a lot like the silhouette of Cornithar.
But what world would both lead to a need for Cornithar and create him at the same time? What hero could withstand the challenges within that world and be molded into the emperor he is destined to become? Imagine them being inseparable from that point forward.
When dreaming up the worlds of The Dark That Dwells, everything started with character.
We knew we wanted a story where a spacefaring wanderer fought with a bow and a sword against enemies with guns. And wouldn't magic be cool too? Oh, and we'll need a villain. And someone who uses all that magic. And what about gods? What if there was a disgraced warrior who struggled for redemption?
See? From the beginning, it already has to happen in space at some point. And if this guy wanders around, there must be other planets than where he starts. If the villain hates magic users, it could be a religious thing. The magic user would have to hide to survive. Where has she been hiding? And on until a world starts to take shape.
Okay, so the character and the world walk onto the stage. What then? Well, they take off together.
Imagine the character and the world moving as a team.
Instead of the world unfolding like a pop-up book and your character being moved around in it like a figurine, imagine that they travel along together at all times through some other sort of substance. That substance is the story.
Now for the fun part. Your character has an arc. They'll change and they'll grow, hopefully for the better, but maybe for the worse.
All kinds of things happen, but your sad little world gets left out. It just sits there gathering dust. Poor world. It had such an interesting beginning.
But that's not the way it should be. Let your world evolve too. Have it grow and change. Now, we aren't talking about an actual transformation to the shape of it or to the climate, though that's always a viable idea and happens in lots of stories. Think of it more of an evolution in the presentation of it. Just like you reveal your character's fear of heights or her deeply held secrets, reveal your world's latent properties. Is there something special about your world that's only realized as your character learns to see it in a different way? Is the way in which you originally present it only a hint of what actually lies behind the scenes?
In The Dark That Dwells, we present a familiar but hopefully interesting space opera setting.
And sure, the nations, factions, and players are unique, but there are still stars and planets and spaceships. Gotta let you get your footing after all.
But as our characters discover hidden gifts within themselves and evolve in the face of setbacks and challenges, we slowly reveal that they had no idea what kind of world they inhabited. In fact, the world does its best at every turn to say to them and to the reader, if you thought that was unexpected, check this out.
Of course, we keep it fair, and we never break the established rules of the world. We just let our world show it always has a new surprise for anyone who starts to get complacent.
All right, let's shift gears a little.
You get it by now. Your character and the world come in together and go forward together. Everywhere a character looks, there's something to see. But what do they see? Oh man, now it goes from just a fun concept to actual work. Turns out someone has to cultivate all this growth and keep it all in motion. Psst, that's you.
So, what kind of city does Cornithar see on the horizon when his ship of mercenaries finally crosses the Sea of Troubles? Good question. What kind of city does anyone see on the horizon by sea? It might have structures of some kind. Maybe a giant statue. But there would probably be other ships. Is a dragon circling overhead? Can you imagine it, but find it's hard to put down on the page?
Use something real for inspiration. Find a real city on the sea, such as the city of Rhodes from ancient Greece. Seriously, search for it online. Check out the Colossus. Look at the harbor. Getting any ideas? Now look at ancient buildings from history. Look at their color, inspect the materials they used. Does this inspire anything for your story? Think about what those bricks could be made of. Did they use a certain type in Rhodes? Why? What natural resources might your city have nearby that may have shaped its construction?
Compile images and information like this and have them available as you write. Find a cool castle or tower that has nothing to do with roads, and then change it to fit the architectural style of the region you made up. Plop it right in the middle of town.
That's what we do in The Dark That Dwells. If you read our story, you'll eventually visit the city of Cistern. It's a hidden city, located on an island underneath an ocean in a massive cavern complex. It's always night there, and the denizens aren't exactly upstanding citizens. Our inspiration for its streets, taverns, and transportation? The French Quarter in New Orleans.
That's a place with some special meaning for us, and a place we've wandered around more than a few times. We used the memories we had of it to color the city we dreamed up. But we also added bioluminescent plants, a deep mining system full of ghost ore around a hidden temple, and a towering manor that sits above it all, home to a crime lord wielding her powers over light and dark, dreaming of a corrupted ancestor she hopes to find.
The real world has castles. Your world has castles. But what's different about yours? Maybe nothing. Don't feel like it has to be. But if that's what you want, show it in your world building.
Does it hold the soul of its builder in its walls? Find the right moment, when your character needs a friend maybe, to have it whisper their name. Do your citizens use insults as currency instead of cash? You might show your character having to get a little nastier than normal when inflation devalues the worth of the average quip.
And it would be easy to say, yeah, no kidding, to this particular concept, but keep in mind that you also ground your readers in the world when you show them something they sort of recognize.
The point here is not to be different from the real world for difference sake, but rather to show how your world is unique by hearkening back to the familiar world we all actually live in.
We do this in The Dark That Dwells. There's a bow and arrow, but the bow folds up to fit into a leg holster, and the arrows come from a 3D printing quiver that basically changes the arrowheads based upon the situation. Some explode, some shock, and some even create fog. But it's still a bow and arrow with basically the same properties.
In Cistern, somebody rides a cart pulled by an artist. It's got fur and tall ears, 6 eyes, and big clawed paws instead of hooves. But it's a horse.
We've probably all heard the phrase show, don't tell. Every world building tutorial mentions it, and they all say to avoid telling unless you absolutely have to. But what does that mean?
Well, for us, it's pretty simple. Avoid overtly spelling out anything as far as lore or backstory if you can.
When you can't, try to keep it short. There aren't really any absolutes in anything, but you should probably avoid anything that goes like this. Well, John, as a member of the Order of the Primrose yourself, you know that pomegranates aren't allowed in Gardendale. Yeah, he does know. So why'd your character have to tell him? Seems like you're telling your reader. Don't do that. Instead, show John go absolutely nuts on some poor soul who had the audacity to traffic in the sale of such forbidden fruit.
And a word on info dumps. It's really hard not to do this sometimes. If you're the sort of writer who writes entire volumes on the backstory of your world, knowing only like 10% may even make it into your story, it can be tempting to overload the reader with all those details. Or maybe you just really need the reader to understand the relationship between two rival factions.
What if the key to understanding why Georgina hates Barbara's guts lies in some spat that happened generations before they were born, and maybe even they don't know the details? Well, you try to sneak that info in small ways, like by having your character find a journal entry or discover an old family tree. It could also be fine if Georgina, Barbara, or the reader never find out why. But what if none of it matters unless the reader knows?
Sometimes you just gotta tell them, and it's fine, really. But just keep it short and pray it isn't too boring. Pro tip, if it's boring to you, it's definitely boring to them. And if you have a character say something like, well, that was boring, you should strongly consider tossing it out or revamping it.
Remember that scrolling gold text in Star Wars Episode 4 that told you the galaxy was in the middle of a civil war? It worked. And I'm willing to bet that writers had the whole show don't tell thing going on back then too. But can you imagine if one of the droids had walked up to the princess and said something like, "Oh, hey, princess. As you know, we're under attack by Darth Vader. He must really want those Death Star plans real bad. Better hand them over to me so we can keep the whole Civil War thing going." You've probably seen that movie a few times. But can you imagine how confusing those initial scenes would have been to the average moviegoer in 1977 without some sort of context?
In The Dark That Dwells, we try our best to avoid any dumping of info. But at one point, we had to spell out some of the background details, just a little. We had a lot happen so far, and we needed a moment to help the reader make some sense of it. So, we had a character muse over the pertinent political relationships of the galaxy after getting a stern reprimand from his boss. This was after the concepts he thinks about had already been played with and revealed in small bites earlier.
Our goal was to have already hinted at things and raise questions in the reader's mind, so that when this guy comes along and answers them, the reader would be eager to hear it. With a story so complex and with so many moving parts, it's just too confusing if somewhere along the way you don't give the reader a little bird's eye view perspective. But like we said, keep it brief if you can.
The big point here is to try to release information about your world through the actions of your characters and have them learn about things at the same time your reader does.
That way they can process it through the lens of the story, not by having several pages of what basically amounts to a mid-story glossary. As you reveal little tidbits about the backstory of your world and its inhabitants, try doing it in ways that hold back some of the info.
Only give them half the details, or leave things vague until the time is right to explain more.
Think of this like a great dress that accentuates your figure, but is even sexier because it leaves something to the imagination.
For example, it's way cooler to hint that something bad happened to the people of a city that no one wants to talk about than to have someone sit down and explain what it was like to be there the day the bombs fell. Have people dart from place to place, avoiding open spaces. Have people from the last generation be hard of hearing due to the explosions. Have your character question why half the city is old and the other half looks new. Let your character be curious and search for answers at the same time as the reader, and when they learn these new things about the world around them, the reader will too.
In The Dark That Dwells, most of the characters in the world are oblivious to the events of the past. Their world is small and limited, and history has only been recorded for about 2,000 years. But they know there was an old civilization. Problem is, they only have a few scraps of information left over from that time. Everything new they learned shows they knew even less than they realized, driving them forward with more questions than they had before. It means there's always something new around the corner and ensures the reader never gets bored.
Ever been to a theme park?
It's a small world after all.
You know how you walk through the queue for a ride and they have some sort of story they're telling to help get you in the mood? For example, you're about to escape from a space station and you're in line for an escape pod. You go through a well-designed set of corridors with pirate ships flying by, and maybe someone on the intercom is providing updates about how badly things are going in engineering. All of that comes together to build an experience.
Ever notice there are rooms just out of sight? Pipes run through the floor with blinking lights below. A set of malfunctioning hatch doors barely opens then closes, blocking the way into another area of the ship. Why? You can't see what's on the other side. Why devote any effort to making that sort of stuff?
Well, in short, because as a storyteller, you can hijack the human mind into telling a good bit of the story for you. What's on the other side of that door? Your mind doesn't have any idea, but it still holds a spot open for that information. It understands something has to be there because doors separate areas. It's probably a brick wall on the other side, but to you, it's the rest of the ship.
Sprinkle in a few more doors and a little extra space between the line and those doors, and your mind says, wow, this sure is a big ship. It isn't. You're in a small building in Florida somewhere. But the designer of the ride was able to create a giant spaceship in your mind, all with some doors that go nowhere and a little paint.
We do that in our writing too, and for good reason. We want the reader to feel that things are happening outside of the scene they're reading about.
Characters offhandedly mention planets they've been to before. They have drinks named after things you don't see in the book. They talk about events that we never show on paper.
We don't have to explain any more than that, but the reader's brain thinks that those things are out there, and that makes the world feel a whole lot bigger.
One huge warning applies here though. Once you do this, the thing you reference is now a part of your world forever. If you throw these sorts of things around and never mention them again, or worse yet, contradict yourself later in some way, your readers will destroy you over it. You have to respect your own creation, or no one else will.
But this is actually a good thing. It gives you a ready-made list of places to go later or people to bring into the story when needed. It also satisfies the idea of Concept 6 by creating questions that maintain interest.
It isn't enough to show off your magic system with feats of power or during conflict, but showing people using powers between fights doesn't do it all either. Instead, think about how the fact that magic exists will affect those who don't get to use it. Do magic users dominate and rule in your world? Are they shunned? Are they rare? Or is the use of magic commonplace? The same could be said for science and technology. Is your world full of wondrous technologies that make life seem like it's just a game? Is there sickness, hunger, or conflict over resources? And what about religion? Does everyone have their own way of seeking a god or the gods? Do people worship a silent god? Or do they keep the faith because they know for a fact that their god lives on a mountain just outside of town? How would people live in a world where the gods are tangible? How can you contrast all of that with how you see the real world?
Creating a world with these questions in mind allows you to develop magic systems, technical manuals, and pantheons. But it also allows you to provide a framework for characters to grow in or to struggle against.
In The Dark That Dwells, one of our main characters is hunted by another of the main characters. For reasons that seem to be apparent at the beginning of the story, the magic-using character has to stay one step ahead of the religious zealot character. The true motivations behind that conflict, one that happens to be only a minor example of the struggle between these two points of view, are central to the history of the world. Because the points of view held by both sides of the conflict are eventually thrown into disarray, the world itself is too. By ensuring that both religion and magic are central to the world we've built, we ensure there won't be a single person in all of the world who won't be shaken by the repercussions of that change.
As they say, the devil is in the details.
How does a woman light her cigarette in your story? With a flame from her fingertip? With a butane lighter? How about with a lit stick of dynamite? Where do people go to the restroom? Do they even have to? Gestures, phrases, even the way people curse can add to the flavor of your creation. Don't pass up an opportunity to polish your world-building efforts with a subtle touch here and there.
Your world can be a living, dynamic thing. After all, that's what makes our own world so amazing from moment to moment.
In our story, we do that with a holographic photo on a desk. We might do it with the way a bartender uses a scanner to verify the quality of a coin instead of biting it. Maybe someone's information is displayed on a flexible screen that unfolds like a scroll. It isn't so much that we're just showing off technology, it's that we're telling a little something about the people who use it.
In a world with retinal implants, why might someone use a potion that helps them see in the dark instead of just using the implant like everyone else? Now, we get to talk about how he's afraid of getting cancer or the implant being detected or disabled. Then, the reader picks up on cancer still being a problem in this futuristic world and realizes that not everyone buys in on the newest tech. Little details can carry big weight.
Beware of thinking that once you explain how things are in your world, all your work is done.
Unless your story takes place in a pond, you should avoid stagnation and keep things fresh and exciting. Is your character growing or changing throughout the story? Your world should keep changing too. Keep thinking of ways to take your character to new places with new properties, all while doling out revelations about the world at large, even in the final pages.
If you stay measured in your efforts and give out information in small bites, you'll be able to hold something back for the end and drop it on the reader when they least expect it. Remember, if you want them reading with curiosity all the way through the epilogue, you have to keep things alive. Your readers want to go on. Keep proving that they've only just scratched the surface, and they'll always dig deeper.
As always, thanks so much for watching.
We hope you agree that these world-building concepts are great to incorporate into your worldview, so to speak, and that you've had a few ideas take shape after seeing them.
And if you found this content useful, be sure to like and subscribe, and hit that bell for notifications so you never miss a new video.
Let us know down in the comments what writing topics you'd like us to cover in the future, and with that, we'll see y'all next time.
Bye!